Welcome to our international dinner tonight, discovering Cuba yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We have Joel and Nell Anderson here to do our presentation. Thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate it. I want to introduce myself. I know a lot of you already, a lot of familiar faces from the Wausau School District, but I'm Julie Bowman, and I like to refer to myself as the new Vicki. Vicki Richmond. She's the new improved Vicki. Retired in July, and I was fortunate enough to take her position and fill her shoes, which have been more like boots rather than shoes. So it's a good thing I have a size 10. So thank you so much for coming today. So I was trying to think as I drove to work today when I first met Nell. And I met Nell almost 9 years ago when I first moved here to Wausau, and I went to work for the Wausau School District, and I was fortunate enough to be an access tester. And she taught me how to work with children. She's an amazing lady, and it was a wonderful experience that I will never forget. Really taught me to connect with children, and I learned so much from her, so I appreciate it. Today they're going to be talking a little bit about their trip recently, well, not so recently, but in 2016, with People to People as exchange for a Rhodes Scholar to Cuba. And I'm very excited to hear about their experiences. They are describing both their unique social and cultural heritage they experienced there today. So with that, I'd like to turn over the floor to our dear friends, the Andersons. Thank you.
We're going to do a tag team, and we've gone to Apple, and so Joel has to stay in the back room and move the slides, but he will have a microphone. But sometimes maybe this is how we work better. A little distance between us. We'll have to see how that is. But I do appreciate this opportunity to work with the International Dinner Lecture. We have a foster daughter that's Nigerian American, and she went here to UWMC and got a great start here, and we had a lot of connections with the international program, and pleased to say she went on to Madison. And she is a doctor. She's a pediatric neurologist at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. So she's done very well. So again, the programs are well worth it, and she got a phenomenal start here, and we've been very pleased with that ever since. Yes, Joel and I went on a People to People with our good friends Jim Kraft and Karen Briggs. Jim Kraft is here tonight. And we, at that time, the trips to Cuba had to be educational, and they had to be either people to people or have a certain component that would be approved by the government to be able to go. So as we traveled to Cuba, they do give you quite an extensive reading list of material and information to read because, again, we were an educational group, but which was very beneficial because it's always good to know a little bit about things before you get there. So one of the things that we learned about Cuba was the fact is their very close connection to the United States and their desire to be similar or to be in a mirror, let's say, to the United States. Look at their flag. It's red, white, and blue. Their Capitol building is very similar to our U.S. Capitol building, but they say theirs is a foot and a half higher than ours. They were a Spanish, not colony, what do they call it, a Spanish...
Province.
See, we'll work. And the Spanish province, and so thinking coming from Spain that they would pick up the sports and things that were popular in Europe, but no, they went to baseball, and who's this baseball player?
Tony
Joe?
Perez.
Tony Perez. But it was interesting, we met some people, and I remember one guy, I said, baseball, and he said, where are you from? I said, well, near Minnesota. Well, he said, Tony Oliva, and I thought, gosh, he was naming off all the baseball players that he went down in Cuba, so it was kind of fun. Many people are flocking to Cuba. We were there 2 weeks after the Pope had been there. The last 3 popes have all visited Cuba. It is not a Catholic country, but it does have that. And 2 weeks after we left, Obama was there, so we were kind of wedged in between some people, interesting people. People say they want to get there before it's become too Americanized, but McDonald's is already there. And I'll tell you where McDonald's is. It's at Guantanamo Bay. The U.S. Rents property from the eastern part of the island, and they've had this property since the late 1800s, Spanish-American War, and we've been paying rent on this property, and it's supposed to be a fueling station. And Cuba likes to think of themselves as the center of the Caribbean. And you can see by this picture, it kind of looks that way. It is a very strategic location, and it has been an interest of the United States since in the 1800s to be part of that. In the late 1800s, U.S. was talking about building the Panama Canal, and they saw the strategic placement of Cuba as being kind of a protection of the Panama Canal, as well as a way to connect with shipping and goods and services there. So. Joel, you can do the Remember the Maine.
So 1898 is the Spanish-American War, and a ship exploded in the Havana harbor, and it was the Maine, and that's where we get the phrase, remember the Maine, the hell was Spain. U.S. and Cuban relations were very strong all during the second half of the 1800s. Their economy of Cuba was based out of the United States, not with Spain so much. The U.S., Cuba was working for independence for many years, and the United States came in about 1898, sort of at the end, and that's where they get the claim for Guantanamo.
What's interesting about the Maine is they really don't know who blew it up or how it was blown up. And you start reading, some of the politics of the time and the desire for the U.S. to have more control in the Caribbean, but also have, pushing Spain out. And, with all that, we also got Philippines and some other areas. So it's kind of interesting to think about who might have blown up the Maine. But this is Batista, and he was grew up on the island, was a farm boy and then got into the military. He led several coups, and he was elected to office. He led coups in office. He kind of would go in and out. He would get to the United States and, kind of regroup and then go back to Cuba, either in a coup or elected. He was an extremely ruthless dictator, but he had a lot of friends from the United States that were down there. He had, I think...
He built many contracts with United States firms so that, in the 1950s, the U.S. owned a majority of companies, the utilities, the mines, the railroads, and he had the contracts that benefited himself personally as well.
Right, he had a lot of connections. The U.S. had fruit and sugar cane, and most of those things were all owned by U.S. Companies.
It was also a time of corruption. Here's Meyer Lansky.
He was kind of the mob's accountant, and he spent a lot of time in Cuba, and he would bring a lot of the mob's money down to Cuba, and they would launder it there. And he and his friend Lucky Luciano were people that did a lot of things happening in Cuba. So Cuba opened up as kind of a Las Vegas of the Caribbean, if you will, and they had a lot of gambling. There was a lot of alcohol during Prohibition, as well as alcohol flowing freely. There's prostitution. There were drugs, and it's kind of interesting because at this time, people say, well, why did you want to go to Cuba? There's things, and I said, well, I've always had this picture of my grandma and grandpa in Cuba, and I think they kind of went in the late 40s, early 50s, and grandma's got this big sombrero hat on, and she looks like she's having a really good time, and then I start doing all this history and reading, I'm thinking, grandma, grandpa, down there with anyway, so they came home. Frank Sinatra was big going down to Cuba quite often. often, and they say that some of the books that we read said that he would have 2 suitcases and they'd be full of money as he'd come into the country to, again, launder the money for there. It was a very popular place for a lot of Hollywood, a lot of big business and the wealthy people. And then we have this guy named Fidel Castro, and he grew up also, but he was raised by parents who had some wealth, and he was at a Jesuit school, so he had the opportunity to go to school. But he did have some very concerns about the way that Batista was running the government. So he formed a group of men that landed on the island, on the southern part of the island, and they took over. They several times they attempted, and they finally did have some success in taking over the government. His main thoughts were healthcare and education. Those are things he talked about. He wanted the distribution of wealth, but again, too. Power, obviously, he was a reformer, but he also was a dictator of sorts. One of the books that was recommended for us to read was called Waiting for Snow in Havana by Carlos Erie. And Carlos Erie is now a professor at Yale University in religion and history. And he was born in Cuba, and what I got connected to the book right away when I started reading it, because he was born a day before I was, back in 1950. So it was interesting. So he goes through his life. It's his autobiography of his life in Cuba, and the TV shows that he watched. And he, again, Carlos had a family of means. His father was a judge. His mother had money. So it's very interesting to read this book and hear about all these things that were happening, and his father not believing that somebody could come in and actually take over like Castro was saying he was going to do. But again, he was quite articulate about his life there, and then he was one of the Peter Pan children. These were the children that were just placed on airplanes and flown to Miami to get out of there because of the fear of what Castro was doing and some of the things that were happening. There were reports of many people missing, killing, there's torture. The economy kind of got to a standstill while all this reform was happening. They took over houses and apartment buildings and distributed housing for everyone, which it sounds good, but again, you have some issues with some of those concerns. At that time, very few, maybe 18% of the children were being educated. And one of his big things was to have education for all, but then there's some drawbacks with that. Also, medication or health care was something that he wanted for all, but there were some drawbacks with that too. I've got some article that I'll read a little bit later about that Carlos Erie has talked about, but anyway. So this is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Joel, do you want to talk about this one? Joel?
Well, just that Castro hoped to equalize the economy and give education for everyone, health care for everyone, and yet we ended up close to a nuclear meltdown as he's there. Castro's also disgusted with Khrushchev because Khrushchev made the deal with the United States directly and didn't include Castro in any of the bargaining at the end of that crisis.
The Cuban Missile Crisis then was the incident where Russia came and put missiles in Cuba and aimed them towards the U.S. And the reason that we ended up pulling out of that, or the reason the missiles were taken out, was the fact that we had put missiles, the U.S. had put missiles in Turkey and aimed them at Russia. So the U.S. and Russia agreed that, okay, if we'll take our missiles away if you take your missiles away. Now, again, growing up in the late 50s, early 60s when this was going on, I don't know if any of you remember the duck and cover and getting underneath your desks at school and kind of these things that we were taught that because, it was a big threat. And there are people that say, why would you want to go to this country that did threaten you? And you kind of go, well, again, it's a learning experience for educators who keep trying to find some more information.
And our guide had a different perspective of that whole incident, which was that it was Khrushchev that brought the missiles in secretly, and Castro said that he wanted to make it very public, but
Yeah.
there was a little different twist than what we've learned.
So
here in
again,
the
you,
US.
you get one side of the story, and then you keep doing research, and hopefully you find the other side of the story, but it's an educational experience. So after this Cuban Missile Crisis, there was also the incident of the U.S., we'll show you some pictures of the Bay of Pigs area, but I mean, Kennedy inherited a lot from Eisenhower, a lot of the politics of the whole Caribbean and of that whole of the Cuban area, and so he felt with this Cuban Missile Crisis, we've got to stand firm on this. We've got to show them what's going on. So he declared an embargo, but not until he sent out his aides to go and buy up every last Cuban cigar in Washington, D.C. So we got, I don't know how many thousands of cigars. And then he said 1,200
They say
cigars,
1,200.
they said. Anyway, so then he got that, and then he said, okay, now there's an embargo. We're not going there. So, okay, we landed we had to fly out of Miami, and we landed at the airport there in Cienfuegos. Part of that going to Cuba, we had to make sure that we were signing that we would not talk to any communists while we were there, and that we would also talk very positively about the United States and not do anything. Were there other things we had to sign or had to look at? Okay, I remember we had to sign off on these things, and we had to promote the U.S., I think was one of the big things, so. This is a map of Cuba. If you see on the far right-hand corner down there, that's Guantanamo Bay. The yellow area is Guantanamo Bay. And kind of in the center, Cienfuegos is kind of in that orange-purple. It's a kind of a dot in the center on the southern coast. So we flew into Cienfuegos, and that is a French colonial city. It's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Then we traveled from there. We went down to Trinidad, which is, it's the city in Cuba, not the island. So Trinidad is a Spanish colonial city. We went up to Santa Clara. You see that kind of in the center of the country, and then traveled to the Bay of Pigs, which was that bay on the left-hand side, kind of a bay there, and then up to Havana, and then we also did some areas outside of Havana. Joel, you can talk about this one. You found this.
Tourism is the big industry right now. The airlines, if you noticed in the news lately, they're cutting back their daily flights to Cuba. They are not getting the demand that they thought they would get for visitors. And on a recent flight, we saw in the magazine that Cuba has a vaccine for lung cancer. Their big export now is biotech and medical care. They provided the most medical workers for Africa with the Ebola crisis. They offered 1,200 doctors to come to the United States after the Hurricane Katrina, which the United States declined. They send doctors all over the world, especially Venezuela, which is a partner right now.
Right.
And their medical assistance is named after Henry Reeve, who was a U.S. citizen about the time of the Civil War, who came to Cuba to help with the fight for independence there.
Okay, this is in Cienfuegos. Again, like I said, it's the French colonial city. Some pictures of the area there in the center square, and of course the old cars are there. This is the theater, and it's a beautiful theater indoors. This is a government building. These are Karen and Jim. You guys are in quite a few of these, so you can smile. And the hotel that we stayed at, which was very nice, and the room right below us was, it said Castro stayed here, so it's kind of interesting you have that. But these are views looking out of the hotel. That was an old sugar plantation person's home, and now it's taken over as a hotel and restaurant. Some views then of the harbor there in Cienfuegos. Swimming pool, the harbor. Now remember, it's only the United States that has the embargo against Cuba or with Cuba. So other countries are coming to Cuba quite a bit. So there's a lot of ecotourism. There's a lot of people traveling. Here's the city square, which is like any place where kids go and show their fashions and wait to be seen. The common places were quite open to us. We felt very safe and secure while we were there. People are not allowed to have guns, so we felt very safe and secure. Che Guevara was one of the compadres of Fidel Castro, and Che came from Argentina. Was a physician, and he did work with Castro and was part of the whole coup when they did take over and worked with the government. Che did go to trying to spread the whole idea of what they called it socialism or Caribbean socialism. He was going to Central America. He wanted to go to South America. He also went to Africa to try to bring some of the reform and the revelations that they had done in Cuba. That he was trying to take them over. He was
Angola
yeah,
in the mid-'60s.
and he was killed, I think, by the U.S. right in Bolivia. So we went to the Escuela de Art, which is the Benny Moore school. Benny Moore was a musician there, and the students performed for us. It's a very unique way of identifying gifted and talented students in the country. Each state has their own gifted and talented school, elementary school, and people go out to recruit. And again, these kids don't have the opportunity, for the most part, to have any practice with dance or music or instruments or things. But the gifted and talented advisors go out and look for students with certain stature, with certain desires to want to be part of this. So it's, again, a very interesting way to build their, and it's a boarding school, so it's something too that the families have to say that they're, but again, it gives students the opportunity. So the arts are very well valued there, in that people get paid just as much to be an artist, to be a musician, to be artists. So students are working. Also, some of the teachers and instructors were able to sell some of their paintings, so they had some of those out there. But these are some of the paintings that, some of the work that was done there. There was dance. There, again, was music and dance. So some of the wrought iron in Cienfuegos. You can see the wrought iron things. We had the opportunity to attend a chamber orchestra, and they did a phenomenal job. But these people, they teach classes, but again, it's a government pays individuals a salary, and for the most part, it's about between $30 and $40 for everybody. Doctors do get a month, $30 to $40 a month. Doctors do get $60 a month. But for the most part, everybody's getting this 30, 40. So if you are an artist or a musician, that's what you get. So they often try to find ways to supplement their income, and that's happening more and more in Cuba. We also had the opportunity to go to an after-school program of traditional dance. So these children came after school, and they taught us how to do some of these dances and some of the farm dances that were traditionally there. And just like any other place, you have proud parents that are looking on and being pleased with their kids and just to see what they're doing and how they're working. The next city we went to then was Trinidad, which is the Spanish colonial city. Again, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The churches that are there, cobblestone streets, the structure is very Spanish looking. Things are being, as they're looking forward to some more entrepreneurism. People are getting things painted up and getting things cleaned up, but again, it is a process because there was quite a bit of deterioration. You can see the cobblestone streets, and you can also see their mode of transportation. Remember I said people are earning $30 to $40 a month. Not many people have cars, so most of the transportation is by foot or public transportation, but the streets there. Little restaurants are opening up. That's a new
Privatization of the
Yeah,
restaurants is new.
privatization had been, government controlled, and now with more and more tourism, they're opening up small little restaurants for in parts of their homes or out in the streets. Here we are going into a restaurant. And again, there was music at almost every meal that we ate, live music, and these are people, again, that were paid, but however, you did have they were selling their CDs, and the government would help them make those CDs and get them out for distribution. So we picked up a lot of CDs after there. The cars are considered to be a National Historic Treasure, these old cars like this. They are all retro, or whatever done, they're made into diesel because it was hard for them to get gasoline, they were able to get diesel. But for the most part, these old cars are used just for taxi cabs. And again, they're a National Historic Treasure, so the taxi drivers don't own them, they kind of rent them to be able to drive them around for things. We were able to go to a casa particular, and this is like a bed and breakfast. And this couple started this. They traded houses with somebody, and they started their bed and breakfast. And they were very happy to tell us and show us about the things that they were doing there. It was about $15 a night to stay at their bed and breakfast. So that's kind of an interesting piece there. They also had their own farm, because it was very hard to get a lot of they served wine too, not that we were counting, but it was there. But they had their own farm, so they grew a lot of their own fruits and vegetables, and they were able to give some of the surplus. It was kind of like, okay, are you getting taxed to have this? Well, no, but we give our surplus to the schools and to the hospital from our farm, so therefore the government looks upon us as, well, it's not so bad to do that. Again, buildings are in various stages of repair or disrepair, I guess you could say. They're working on it, trying to preserve some of the old. Are we in Santa Clara?
Santa Clara.
Okay, now we're in Santa Clara. And this is in the center community. Again, you're seeing people on their iPads and their phones. The Wi-Fi was basically just in that center square area. Raul Castro, when he got into power, he said, we're going to bring Wi-Fi and cell phones here, because before that, they had limited Wi-Fi access. So you can see people checking. Here they're FaceTiming somebody, probably in the States, but you can see that they're FaceTiming on their iPad to somebody. But again, the Wi-Fi was just basically in the city square. The hotels had it, but it was very sketchy. You had to pay extra, you'd have to go down to the lobby, so it's just kind of nice to be away from your...
They also have access to every television show imaginable from the U.S.
Remember
They're pirated and put onto memory sticks, and they can watch it all
because we have this
commercial-free.
embargo. Yeah, because we have this embargo, that means that they don't have to obey the rules of the U.S. So the things that they are picking up and getting, and they don't have to answer any copyright. So it's kind of an interesting piece there. Graffiti on the walls, like anything else, too.
Here's another bed and breakfast, and upstairs is a restaurant where we were dining during a noon meal.
So again, they have done a nice job of keeping the traditional old looks of the towns and community.
And again, music, live music.
In Santa Clara, we were able to go to a senior citizen center, and it was very interesting for them to talk about. They kind of started it as a place for people to meet and get together, seniors, and also if they had needs or specific concerns, it was a place for them to be able to talk and converse. This is a ball game that you hit the stone, and the stone flies up, and then you try to hit it with a stick. And there's somebody trying to do it, but I don't know. It took him a couple times, but he did that. And then they told us these traditional dances. They had stories about the fan and how that was kind of a protective thing, and secrets are there. And there was dancing. I think we turned the music off, Joel, so you can't really show us how you did the dancing. But Joel got out there and had a good time with the dancing, so it was fun. The senior citizens did some handcrafted work, and that was for sale there too. That's my favorite activity too, is shopping. We then went to the Che Guevara Museum and Monument and this was right outside of the Santa Clara area. And Che, like I said, is considered to be, in the country, they look to him as a real hero, national war hero. So a lot of his pictures are on money and also, statues around. Little boy with his chicken.
I'm talking about money. We had to bring all of our money cash, and when you exchange the money for the Cuban peso, it's taxed 14% automatically. We do not have access to any ATM machines in Cuba. Other countries, their citizens can.
You're right. So
it's
if
the
you
U.S.
had-
forbids it.
If you had a credit card that would take euros, you could use it at the shops and places there. But again, our U.S. credit cards, and I mean, that's how we travel a lot. It's just with our credit cards. So it was kind of a, how much money do we take, and is there going to be enough? And we were there. Okay, this is the Bay of Pigs, and this is some of the military things that there. They've got a museum there at the Bay of Pigs. We were able to. That's some transportation. It's there.
We went snorkeling at the Bay of Pigs, and sort of humorously, they told us, well, if any American official asks, you were not snorkeling, you were on an independent marine biology study.
Exploration time.
Because
so
we cannot go as a U.S. citizen
we couldn't
for
just
recreation.
Be tourists and recreation. And Joel, when you snorkeled out there, what did you see?
One tire, 2 cans, that was about it.
I saw one small little fish. So
We weren't in the right spot
We weren't in
for
the right
snorkeling.
spot. They told us we had to go much farther, but we only had about 10, 15 minutes. So we said we had to snorkel in the Bay of Pigs. This is some Norwegian bikes that are there. Like I said, the other countries are able to come. They do an eco tour, so they get on their bikes in Santa Clara and ride to Havana or ride to other parts of the country. They have beautiful resorts that are there that people go to and just spend their time there. I was talking to somebody out that has been on a cruise already to stopping at certain places along, and that's going to be more and more common to see some of those cruises that are going on there. But again, the embargo has not been fully lifted. I think there's still some things that we have to watch for. So
There are 5 squares in Havana. The first is the fort. This is the fort.
this is
not
the
one
fort.
of the
This isn't one of the squares. Yeah, this is the Fortress San Carlos, which was, again, very strategically placed in the harbor, and it was a lot of the Spanish-American War was fought around this area. The way that location of that fort was very strategic, and again, it's still standing today, and you can see it's got a great view of the city as well as the ocean there.
And you can see the cruise ships there.
Yeah, huge
coming
cruise
from all
ships
over
and
the
that.
world.
Mm-hmm. And the Cuban flag line. And this is a view then from the Capitol. Remember I said it looks like the U.S. Capitol? But now in Havana, there are 4 plazas, and this is Plaza de la Catedral, and this is our group, our Rhodes Scholar group, and the cathedral and breakfast. It was a Sunday that we were there, so we were able to go into the church. People were worshiping in the church. Just to take a moment to talk about, the idea of the church in Cuba. Remember I said that Castro was raised by Jesuits, but he later went on to say that the country is an atheist country and kind of tried to downplay the whole religion thing. He really felt that a lot of the religion, particularly the Spanish influence there, that he was involved with, held the people down. So anyway, the religion is kind of more of a cultural thing right now in the country. You have the Santeria, which is some maybe traditional cultural pieces. So people might have a crucifix in their house, but they will also have the bowl of water to ward away the spirits and things. So this is the cathedral, Cathedral Square. Flamenco dancer, and I'm doing my little dance thing there. Again, restaurants, they pull a few tables out, and you don't even know which restaurant you're going to, but you sit there, and they bring you lobster. We had a lot of lobster and a lot of the different food. And you don't know where they're making the food, but it somehow gets on your table, and it's there. The Plaza of the Arms, the battalion that was there in the city. There was a booksellers there. Karen works at Yankee Bookstore, so she had to have her picture taken as the bookseller area. Again, this was at one time just one family's dwelling, and now you see it's multiple families that have identified here. This is the hotel where Ernest Hemingway, when he first came, he was messing around in the Keys and he had to flee, so his wife chased him out, and he was at this hotel, and his mistress, I think there's stories of her climbing back and forth on the different balconies to meet up with him. This is one of his favorite bars, and they claim that it's the home of the mojito, so we had to check that out. Again, musicians were there. Beautiful places in Havana. People were out. It was Sunday. Oh, here's actually a mosque. So you see that there are different religions. We also were in a synagogue while we were there. A lot of the areas, if buildings are not able to be restored and they've come down, they are putting in parks and small little areas. So people are sitting and resting in the parks. This is the old plaza. And here's some pictures of some of the reconstruction that's going on. And they've made it into a phenomenal little art plaza garden. So just like we have the cows, they have the chihuahuas. So they have these art chihuahuas that are there. So they're all around. Joel's looking at it. And the kids were enjoying this. Again, a lot of kids were out with their families. They weren't eating in the restaurants, but they were out with families and having a good time on a Sunday afternoon. They are starting to recycle in Cuba. This is the one and only recycling bin we saw while we were there. So again, some of the scenes of Havana. Narrow streets, ornate buildings. And this is in the old Havana area, so it's kind of there. Various stages of construction and deconstruction. T-shirts, like any place with Che on it. This was a chocolate shop where they were lined up to get in and to buy their chocolates. And you bought 1 or 2 pieces of chocolate. We bought more. And this is St. Francis of Assisi Square. That church has been now converted into a concert hall, but it is interesting it was there. Some modern art. We got up on top of that. This is the same square in the evening.
And we were able to go out and about on our own, no problem.
Yeah.
It wasn't like we were restricted in any way by Cuba.
And this is the
Revolutionary
Square, which is kind of downtown. This is Che Guevara, and this is Cienfuegos. He was another leader there. This is the Hotel Nacional, which is supposed to be fashioned after the Breakwaters, which is in Miami area. That was the one where Lance Meyer Lansky had his pictures up all over the place, and he was, frequent one at the Hotel Nacional. This is the old Hilton Hotel, and you see the building in front of it. You want to talk about that, Joel?
Well, it's called salsa architecture. When Castro took over, he took the property, supposedly paid the owners for it, and then distributed it to other people. So people own individual apartments, but nobody owns the common spaces. So the fascias, indoor common spaces, elevators,
Hallways, entranceways.
nobody owns, so nobody takes responsibility for it. So those are places that will often be neglected.
And if you're earning $30 to $40 a month is all. I mean, it's not like you want to spend money on fixing up the hallways and things
But
like that.
originally, the building was very modern, streamlined look, and now you can see the patchwork kind of color as
Yes.
each person does
made it
their
their
thing with
salsa.
their piece.
There's the hanging.
And there's architecture from all over the world. You'll see Moorish influence, you'll see Dutch architecture.
Those four squares that we
Modern.
looked at were kind of the downtown, or the older part of the city, but modern. And you also see a strong influence from Russia, too. This is the U.S. Embassy. The building behind there is the U.S. Embassy. And right now, we do not have an ambassador there. We do have statesmen, people that are there, but not an ambassador. However, you see these flagpoles in front. Well, what happened was the U.S. had a, what do you call it?
Scrolling marquee,
Scrolling
electric
that
marquee
said
on the top.
communism is bad, U.S. is good, and they had this up there. And the Cubans really didn't like that, even though it was the U.S. Embassy. So what they do, put up all these flagpoles and put black flags on all the poles so they could block out that scrolling marquee of all the things were there. Modern Art Museum, it was very beautiful, a lot of the art, but a lot of it was traditional, many items that had been taken from people under the Castro regime. But some very modern art. Baseball stadiums, of course, that's one of their biggest exports too, is baseball players, particularly to the U.S. The moon in Havana. This is the North Korean embassy in Havana. We were in a neighborhood and we were going to a silversmith. She was just a new entrepreneur. She was just starting to take her art and make it into silver and start selling it. So we were kind of driving through some of the neighborhoods. So again, houses are divided up, multiple families in houses. So some were well kept and some were in the process of being taken care of. Old car, it's working on. This was the silversmith lady and some of the silver that she was looking at. She was employing people to make the silver. That's a necklace that one of the women bought. It's very pretty. So, and this is, they would take U.S. dollars there, so I was using my U.S. dollars. This is a ration store. Remember I said they've got limited dollars. So what they do is get ration cards. So every month you get a ration card for you and members of your family. You go to your neighborhood store. This is the counter. This is what you get to choose from. So go back just a second, Joel. I'm sorry. But you can see one choice of soap, a couple different choices of rum, but candles. You got your 7. There's honey, perhaps some sugar, some salt. But this is your ration store. You had ration cards, and that's how you would get your food. You get 7 pounds of rice per person per month. So you would get that. Now you also would be able to buy items at the farmers market, and the farmers market now says it has to be directly from the grower to the farmers market. So these are some sites of some of the fruits and vegetables and peppers and garlic. I like that garlic there. Beans, we'll have some of those tonight, some rice. Here's some meat. I'm sure that our meat tonight won't have been out like that on sale, but that was the cutting up the meat. We went to the Christopher Columbus Cemetery. Now this too was a place that has Carrara marble, and it's so massive an area with all this white Carrara marble that astronauts say they can see it from space, this white blob. And it's very ornate. And this is an area, too, that, you think of Castro and he's going in and taking over some things. He didn't touch the artifacts, the icons and things that were in churches, and he also didn't touch the things that were here at the cemetery. So he must have realized that that would be important to the people and that those are things that they didn't want to go after. Yeah, they were getting valet parking. This is one of the restaurants we went to, a very fine one, fancy. The food for the most part, is not very spicy. I think people think spicy when they think of the Caribbean, but it was not very spicy. We probably had lobster as an option almost every night on the table that was there, and there were also we're having some of the traditional dishes tonight for our dinner.
They complain that the restaurants are taking a big share of the food that's available and that the general population isn't getting access to as much
To a
food
lot
as
of
they
foods.
would like.
But again, they're quite limited with their choices of food. I mean, they don't want to do, I mean, you saw the same vegetables coming up all the time. I mean, you didn't see Brussels sprouts, you didn't see broccoli, and Paladar means that this is a family that owns this place, and they can put their few tables in their house and start having the food there. Havana Club really was the Bacardi Club rum people, but Bacardi had to leave, or they took out and left. But so fresh fruits and vegetables, but not a wide variety. Taro, squash, chicken. This is the beef that we're going to be having tonight will be that. The rice, fish, different fish pieces. Lobster, like I said. And again, very pretty good. Again, oh, and desserts, they had those too. And we're going to have some dessert tonight, so that's going to be great. Different modes of transportation from all over. Again, people say that Americans come to Cuba to see the old cars, and then the Cubans go to Havana to see some of the new cars. But a lot of people, and so it really means that a lot of the people just stay right within their area. They don't do a lot of traveling. There is public transportation with buses and things, but often they are so full. They're very reasonable, two or three pennies to ride, but they're so full that people can't get on them, and sometimes they don't even stop for people because they're so full. So there are some new cars that are there too. Joel just had to prove that it wasn't. We'll see. And a bus tour, of course. We did not take the bus tour. This was our bus that we rode on. It was from China. They said they only had a year warranty on it, but it was okay because it was the 11th month that the bus had been there. So they were teasing us about that. That's an MG that this guy was redoing. The people worked very hard to take care of these gem-colored cars. You can see it was very fun to just look at them in the various colors. Gasoline. Diesel. I think
That was a shrimp farm.
Shrimp farm. We heard quite a few lectures. We had lectures by architects. We had lectures by women in religion. We had this guy was the former ambassador to the European Union from Cuba, so he talked about the politics. And of course, they've got their PowerPoints too, and they're willing to share things with us. We went to a modern dance in a synagogue, and so this modern dance group then was on its way, leaving soon to going to the U.S. and was touring throughout the U.S. I think Jacob's Pillow out in Massachusetts was one of the places they were going. But anyway, so it's very interesting to see. That kind of, and again, they get paid. That's a salaried job that they get. We went to a bookstore that was an English bookstore, kind of a coffee shop, and we talked to 20-somethings. This is the owner of the bookstore. She's from the U.S., but she kind of wants to have the sanctuary place for people to come and talk their feelings, I guess you could say. I talked to this woman here that was a physician. She was trained as a physician. Her mother was Russian. Her father was Cuban. Her mother's gone back to Russia with her sister. She went and became a medical doctor. She wanted to go into urology, but they said, no, you're going to internist. She then was placed after her education. She was placed out in a small village, and she said it was very hard for her as a up-and-coming modern woman to be taken seriously by a lot of the older men, the machismo, I suppose, culture. The men really, so it's one thing to say, yes, they have free medical care, but they've got to get them there to take advantage of it. And again, it's certain limitations. She then said she didn't want, she had to do her 2 years of service because she had free education all the way through all her medical school, but she had to spend 2 years in Venezuela as a physician. She had a boyfriend, so she decided no, she wasn't going to do that. So she quit being a doctor, is now training to be a chef, but she needed some way to make some money, so she is also doing, she's a tattoo artist. And she's saying, well, people are going to really like this because I'm a physician, so they come into her home, and she gives, has tattoos going on. This is a cappella song group. I bought some art from an artist. I buy nativity scenes from all over, so that was one that I bought there. Doing some of my shopping at some of the stores. Our stripes, I guess. A little box. They make things out of, here's beer cans. They've got a little car made out of that. We then went to Finca La Viga, which is to the west of Havana, and that is where Ernest Hemingway lived for 30 years of his life. So this is his home. You can't go into the home, but the doors are open and the windows are open, so you're able to get in and take a look at that. Okay, some of his books are still there because he kind of left, and he wrote in the top of this tower his typewriter that he wrote, Old Man in the Sea, on his view from his farm that's up there, and the Pilar, his boat. We got to ride in these cars again. It was a great time. We had an enjoyable time. It's in front of the Hotel Nacional. Well, we really did love Cuba, and but what's interesting is that there have been other governments that we've been at war with, that we've had issues with. Germany, for example, but now we are, have good relations with them. We have good relationships with Japan, I think it's there, with China, with Vietnam. But there's still something holding back our relationships with Cuba. And this is Raul, who's taken over after Castro. This is his brother. Under Raul, again, like I said, they've started things like the Wi-Fi and bringing things forward, more of entrepreneurship. And also his daughter has been very active in the gay and lesbian rights in the country under Fidel. They did kill off a lot of gay people that if they thought they were gay, they were killed off. So again, we're looking forward to see what's going to happen with our new president and see what sort of relations we're going to have with Cuba. Was there anything else, Joel, you wanted to say? Okay, we've got a couple minutes for questions.
We have about 4 minutes for questions.
And just curious, how many people have been to Cuba out here? So we got some. So you saw some of your things that perhaps were familiar, and hopefully that. What time of the year were you there? We were there in February, end of February.
Environmental ethic?
What'd you say?
Environmental ethic there?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, again, they don't use a lot of products and things, so it's they're limited with their finances. But again, like we were saying, they're just looking at things like the recycling. However, because there haven't been a lot of ships coming in and out of their harbor, a lot of the coral reefs, they said, have been rebuilt in that area, and they are trying to protect that. So they are bringing people in from all over the world to look at some of those things. Yeah.
How much U.S. cash did you take with you on the trip?
I think we took about $1,000, didn't we, Joel? What? Yeah, no, well, he did. I didn't bring any, but the thing is, with our tour, most of the meals and things were provided. However, we did, there were a couple nights that we could go out on our own and have dinner, and usually adult beverages were extra and things. But again, how many T-shirts do you buy and that sort of stuff? It's limited. But so most of the things were paid for beforehand, our hotels and that sort of stuff.
Any other questions?
Yeah, right down here, yep.
When you were talking about how much they make, and yet you're still seeing everybody there with an iPhone or with an iPhone. She's asking, how come people can have iPhones if they're only making $30 or $40 a month? They probably have friends and relatives in the United States or other places that bring things in. When we came off the airplane from Miami, you saw people coming in with big screen TVs, with bicycles, with strollers, with car tires. Yeah, they were coming with a whole lot of things off of that plane, so it was right there. So. Yes.
Any other questions?
Okay, yep.
How could you decide that you should talk to a comment?
Well, sometimes my motto has always been, it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So those of you that know me from the school district, that happens too. But anyway, I'm retired now. But I mean, I think we did. We were out there talking. Joel and I were on a Saturday night. We were in Havana. We walked the Malecon, which is kind of, they call it the Big Sofa, which is right along the beach or along the harbor area and the shoreline. And we walked and talked to people, and and they were very eager to try their English out and share information. Like I said, talk baseball with people and fishing and those other things. So we talked. We didn't ask their politics, so I wouldn't have to be called on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.